For those of you who are joining us on Facebook and or who are watching this later, and in case you haven't been following, today we have the pleasure of interviewing and hanging out with Faris Sheibani. And what I'm going to do real quick, Faris, I'm just going to read the bio from your website. That's cool. And give people a little bit of a background, and then we'll just kind of dig in. If you are watching live from Facebook, I do have it pulled up. Feel free to enter a question. If we have some time later on, then we'll get to those. If you have a direct question for Faris, whether it's coffee related or just Yemen related, or neither, I don't know. Ask them whatever you want. So here we got a bio from Qima's website. Faris was born and raised in the UK, frequently visited Yemen growing up and developing a strong connection to the country. Seeing the massive economic and social challenges that Yemen faced, Faris gradually developed the ambition to improve the lives of his native Yemeni people. After completing an undergraduate degree in chemical engineering at Imperial College London and a master's in engineering and management at the University of Cambridge, Faris worked in the oil and gas sector for several years, gaining experience in process engineering, business development, and commodity trading. Faris planned to use his experience to develop Yemen's energy infrastructure and offer basic power services to the country. But in 2015, civil war broke out in Yemen and forced Faris to seek alternative ways to support his home country. The search led Faris to working in Yemeni coffee, which he views as a fundamental part of Yemen's history and a critical part of his post-conflict socioeconomic recovery. In 2016, Faris established Qima Coffee with the aim of generating sustainable livelihoods for Yemen's smallholder coffee producers through reestablishing Yemen as a renowned specialty coffee origin. Welcome, Faris. Woo! Wait, where's my coffee?
Thank you.
What are you drinking? What are you drinking today?
No, I've had like 5 cups of coffee in 2 cupping sessions, so it's just water. I'm all coffeeed out.
Just water. So I guess it's almost time for a good whiskey over there too, though, right?
Yeah, it's late in the day, yeah.
Well, Faris, thanks again for joining us. You do have some of the questions, and we just kind of go one by one. But for me, the most important aspect of this conversation, one, we definitely want to get into Yemenia, right? We really want to talk about how you guys got started even trying to discover it, and whether it was even intentional or not, what it could do for the industry and all that good stuff. But first and foremost, tell us a little bit about what we just read, a little bit about you, how you went from all this engineering and infrastructure to coffee, and even your family's background into the UK. Give us some goodies.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's always interesting to hear someone read your bio. It feels a bit weird and uncomfortable, but yeah, I'll try and give like the human side to it beyond the bio. So born in the UK, born and raised here in the UK, in the north of England, in a quaint, nice town called Bingley. Nice place to be born, nice place to grow up in. Of course, as you said, family's from Yemen, so my parents are from Yemen. And growing up, every summer we'd go back to Yemen and visit the family, visit the grandparents there, or the kind of extended family. And very relatively early on in my life, so once you really start to figure things out, 10, 11, early teen years, you quickly notice the disparity that existed between my life in the UK, a very nice life, and lives of most Yemenis in Yemen. So early on, I kind of noticed that disparity, and somewhere or another developed this need or this drive within me to do something about that, to find a way to fix that. And my family, so my family's background, my grandfather is an entrepreneur. He was he was born into a village of Sheibani. That's why my name comes from, Bani Sheiba. And he was a shepherd and a farmer. Grew up with nothing. At the age of 13, he left the village and went to the city and opened up a tea and coffee shack. So the irony that I now work in coffee. And he opened one shack, and then another, and another, and another. And through hard work and providence and good fortune, he became very successful and ultimately set up a large industrial group in Yemen. So my grandfather's, but my kind of heritage is a heritage of people who came from the farms, right, the rural communities, and ended up developing a life for themselves And then what my grandfather did anyway was he developed lives for others, right? Through his business. He was really, you know, a social enterprise before social enterprises were a thing, right? Before Bitcoin was even, you know what I mean? So, so I saw that growing up. I had that as an example, as a role model, as a role model. And like I said, I noticed the disparity between Yemen and the UK. So it all made sense. I wanted to do something for Yemen. I had the role models that I could follow, and I could see the difference. And I was very uncomfortable about that difference, and I wanted to solve it. Oil and gas made sense because why wouldn't it? It's Yemen, it's the Middle East. You know, oil is, you know, runs in our veins, right? It's fundamental to our economies, right? So I went into oil and gas, and that was really, you know, 18, 19 years. I was like, well, I'm going to go into oil and gas, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it well, and I'm going to ultimately go to Yemen to do a nice, impactful, beneficial energy project. That was, you know, early on. Did that, spent like 10 years, both in education and ultimately in industry, in oil and gas. And things were really happening. We were on path to really, you know, start discussing, implementing some sort of projects in Yemen. And then the war happened. And with that, any prospect of any serious oil and gas project in the context of a civil conflict in Yemen was out of the window. And so, you know, this is 10 years into your career, and I'm really thinking, well, what do you do now? The value was the value, that ultimate fundamental driver that sits deep within your belly is still there, right? And that's to do something for Yemen. Yeah, I didn't really fall into coffee, but it made sense. You know, I resigned from my job, and I spent time just reading about what are the fundamental macroeconomic drivers in Yemen's history, right? What industries played a huge role in developing Yemen, and coffee was just staring me in the face, not just from an economic perspective, but from a cultural perspective. You know, the way that farmers view coffee in Yemen is really like, it's not just a crop, you know, really. It's really something that's part of their heritage. So yeah, so it made sense, and that's how I got into coffee.
Yeah. For those of you who are just joining us, we're having the great privilege of having a little bit of time with Faris Sheibani, founder and owner of Qima Coffee, who released the Yemenia this year that we have luckily obtained a lot of. Faris, I want to before we dig too much into coffee, I want to talk a little bit more about Yemen, right? Like, I know, like, your parents are from there, and I'm sure you know plenty about the culture, and you've traveled there a lot. You know, we're a brand that believes in the world and culture, and learning more from these other people and culture. So, I guess give us a little backdrop. I mean, you mentioned the war. A lot of people don't even really understand what the war is, and not that you have to go into that detail specifically, but just kind of give us some backdrop of Yemen, culture in Yemen, and what that was like, both growing up in that culture, but also just how we can understand a little bit more about the country as a whole.
Yeah, interesting question. So, how do I sum up Yemen's culture? So Yemen's history is Yemen's history. No, interesting question though, right? I mean, Yemen's history lies in agriculture. The first thing that was built in Yemen civilization was a dam, right? That was 2000 BC. 1700 BC, that was a dam, right? And around that dam was a civilization that was built around agriculture and irrigation, right? Which is interesting. So Yemen's civilization is rooted in agriculture. In the Arab world, Yemen's seen as like the center, the origin of Arabs. So it's also the origin of the Arabic language. It's where it originated from. So it has a critical role in that part of the world. You know, Yemen and Yemenis have a critical role in the history of Arabs. The culture is difficult to sum up. It's a tribal. You know, there is a lot of tribal notions and concepts in Yemen, and with kind of tribal, I suppose, culture or philosophy, hospitality, generosity. You know, these are very important things, and these are some things that I grew up experiencing and seeing the difference between different cultures. And that's something that kind of really stands out for me in Yemen. Like, hospitality and generosity are critical, and it's kind of like the measure of your character is how generous and hospitable you are to both your people that you know, but also guests that you don't know. So it's an interesting culture. As a country, it's fascinating. I mean, look at the background, your background, it's just different, you know, it's really different. And you know, I've traveled to quite a few coffee origins, and just the landscape in Yemen is just radically different. It's just, that's the only way to sum it up. It's different. It's fascinating. And I wish people could visit. I really do. I think when hopefully the war or the situation there improves, I think it'll be a fascinating country for people to visit, and hopefully my words will turn into reality and people will be able to relate more. But it's a very interesting country.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And the background that I have behind me for those watching is this is Yemen. This is you actually probably know better than me. Is this is one of the farms you guys work with behind me, or?
Yeah. I believe this is Qima Coffee, which I think is it's where your coffee is from. It's one of the areas that we work in. It's one of the most unique and fascinating areas. Also one of the highest quality growing regions in Yemen, and it has a 700-year-old coffee growing history.
Yeah,
crazy.
Well, and a lot of people think of the Gulf, if Americans can even know where Yemen is. It is in the Gulf, okay, guys. But we think of desert a lot of times. But you look back here, and that's pretty green and lush. And obviously historically, we have coffee that is debatably from Ethiopia and or Yemen, though I think most people would agree with Ethiopia. But Yemen is such a foundational part. I could obviously go into that, but you give us a little tidbit. What is Yemen's history with culture and how they cultivated kind of the cafe movement?
I think cultivated is the key word, right? Cultivated. Yemen is where they cultivated coffee. I mean, in coffee, Ethiopia's origin, and there it's kind of wild grown, and wild grown is wild grown, right? It just grows. And then Yemen, in the environment in Yemen, didn't allow for wild grown coffee, as far as we know, anyway. And so they had to cultivate it. And I think that's one of the most interesting differences in Yemen. The farmers there have been cultivating coffee, right? Consciously, purposefully cultivating it. And their view towards coffee is not like something that just grows. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just different. It's something that they grow and they cultivate, kind of like a baby. That's really, and that's why whenever we ask many farmers, how do you see coffee? Many of them will say, it's like my child. And there's a relationship there between like cultivating and how you cultivate, I guess, a child's growth. So yeah, I think that's from a coffee cultivation aspect. Probably the first country in the world to cultivate coffee, if not Harar, maybe East Ethiopia. And from a coffee culture, it's also, as far as we know in literature anyway, it's the origin of coffee as a drink, right? That was West Yemen. And so if you think about it, everything that comes afterwards, barista culture, roasting culture, everything that comes from the coffee drink has its roots in Yemen. So it's coffee and Yemeni culture really synonymous. They're fundamentally intrinsically linked.
Right. And I think I would believe most people that are in coffee, whether they're on the barista level, roasting level, or owner level, they know obviously coffee comes from Yemen. But from the consumer level, a lot of people don't realize it, partially because it's not available a lot of places, partially because production level is low, partially because it's so expensive. And to me, that's why this discovery, but also us carrying it, is really exciting, because we want people to understand that. And to me, this is a bigger picture too. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but even just with the production levels changing in coffee, with climate change and things like that, discovering not new regions per se, but even old regions like Yemen, and figuring out how can that impact the global industry on a bigger level. But we'll get into that. Tell me a little bit about kind of how Qima started, and then I want that to go into the discovery of Yemenia, and we'll get into a little bit about Dr. Christoph, and I'd love you to dig into that. But how did Qima get from starting a few years ago to even pursuing the discovery of Yemenia? And kind of, I mean, you mentioned getting into coffee and how that can impact the greater economic reality, macroeconomic reality of Yemen. But kind of where did that, what happened in a year or two in, where you're just like, R&D, we're going to discover this thing? Or tell us a little bit about that.
I've kind of been, so I've kind of been, in general, my view of Yemen is that nobody cares about Yemen. Not in coffee, in general. It's a forgotten place that people don't understand and don't know, and it has a war, but we don't understand it, and it has something to do with terrorism, but we don't really know. It's a bit too complicated, and it has a coffee culture, but it's kind of mythical. So Yemen is this country that's forgotten, really. The world's worst humanitarian crisis, and yet forgotten. And so when it comes to coffee, the very same thing applied. My view on Yemen and the Yemeni coffee industry was that it's just underinvested in, overlooked, and generally forgotten. And so from day one, when we started Qima Coffee, that was the aim of Qima Coffee. The aim of Qima Coffee was to implement a world-class coffee company in Yemen, right? And to put all of our energy and hope and frustration into that organization to use coffee as an example of what can be done with Yemen if it's actually taken seriously, right? Which is coffee, just the industry that we chose. Yeah, so we really that's how we saw Qima. It was like, how can we get the best of what coffee has to offer all around the world? How can we learn from the best of the best around the world and implement something that's the best of the best in Yemen? And when it comes to R&D in coffee, not just in Yemen, but I think as a global phenomenon, not enough is done. And I think there's some interesting reasons why that's the case. But the same applies to Yemen. And when you think of Yemen's history and its pivotal role in coffee and pivotal role in coffee genetics, it's just mind-blowing that no one has done real work in Yemen, on R&D. So as soon as we really built the infrastructure, the coffee infrastructure, because that's the first step, right? Getting into the country, understanding where coffee is grown, understanding the dynamics of coffee growth, really getting into the country. Once that was done, which took about 2 years, the next step was really, dig in and try to understand what exists in Yemen that can be utilized to support the people and farmers, and that can be used to show the world that Yemen is worth noticing and should not be forgotten. And so that was the driver for the work. And so, as you said, kind of 3 years into the 2 years into the project, we really wanted to look at R&D, to look at genetics. 3 years in, we really started it, officially, properly. And then what came next was what came next.
Yeah. So I'm going to break this down as simple as possible, and then have you kind of dig a little bit deeper into the work of Dr. Christoph with you guys. Dr. Christoph was Chief Scientific Researcher for World Coffee Research, 2016, 2019. And just so those who are watching or watch later can understand what we're going to talk about next, and talking about the amazing reality of Yemenia. Essentially, with coffee, like anything else, you have all these different breakdowns of family, species, et cetera, and into like varietals. At least in the coffee, we call it varietals. Yemenia, what we're talking about today, is a mother species. So we're not talking about another varietal, which a lot of the genetic works around the world are usually in creating hybrid varietals or finding out creative ways for a varietal to be more disease resilient, for it to grow and have better production. At the end of the day, mostly for the farmers to have better efficiency and practices. But what's fascinating about this is we're talking about a mother species. And what I mean by that, folks, is you've probably seen on cans or bags, at least especially 10 years ago, Cafe or Coffee Arabica, right? So we're talking about these massive family trees, and you've heard Robusta. Well, 5-10 years ago, every bag that was specialty coffee said Arabica coffee, 100% Arabica. And the reason why they marketed that and that became a thing was because obviously they're letting people know this is the best of the best. And we won't get too much into it, but essentially when we're talking about Arabica compared to Robusta, we're talking about sugar compounds, acid compounds, less bitterness, less bitter compounds, all these things. Nowadays, it's just synonymous with specialty coffee. But see, we're not talking about Arabica and then one of the few mother species and then all the varietals. We're talking about a new mother species. There's only a handful of them, like a couple, right? And we're talking about a genetic that was discovered with Qima and Dr. Christoph that is literally on par with Ethiopia heirlooms, with Bourbon Typica, and with some of the SLs. So Faris, get into that. Let's dig in and talk a little bit about how that research started with Dr. Christoph, what it entailed. I'm sure it was very extensive, and then kind of what that process looked like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So as I said, the idea was really to dig into Yemen's coffee genetic landscape to understand what exists there, and is it interesting, and is it special, and can it be used? Is there anything there that can be used to fulfill the ultimate aim of Qima, which is to use coffee to support the livelihoods of coffee farmers there? So we wanted to know, what is there? Is there anything? Knowing that 98% of worldwide cultivated varieties came through Yemen, traveled from Ethiopia to Yemen, we were like, well, what exists in Yemen today? does it, how does it look like compared to what's growing in the rest of the world, right? How does that reflect? And is there anything in Yemen? Are they still growing the same varieties that exist outside? And is there anything that's different or unique or new? And the second question was really a far-fetched thought, and that we didn't expect, to be honest. So we put together this kind of research project, and we did a genetic survey across Yemen. So from north to south, 25,000 square kilometers, in which we genetically surveyed the coffee trees across the country from Yemen. So DNA fingerprinted to understand, what the DNA fingerprints of those coffee trees look like. And we compared them against some a collection of Ethiopian accessions and a collection of worldwide cultivated varieties. And we put them all together and we said, well, what does this all look like? How does what's in Yemen compare to the rest of the world? The first thing that we found was that, interestingly, despite the fact that, the typical Bourbons left Yemen, 300-400 years ago, and despite the strange and arid and extreme environment in Yemen, and despite the fact that really the coffee industry in Yemen has been declining rapidly and has been largely neglected, that actually today in Yemen, as we speak, all of the groups, so as you said, the mother populations, right? If we split kind of Arabic into mother populations, and if we say across the world there exist 3 mother populations, right, in Coffee Arabica, all of those mother populations that exist today across the world can be found in Little Yemen, okay? Which is interesting, right? Because you wouldn't necessarily expect that. You would think that over 300 years, coffee was just, especially considering the environment and the climate of Yemen, that they stopped growing it, or some of them just died away or were replaced with khat, the narcotic leaf. But no, today in Yemen, Yemen still holds all of the mother populations that exist across the rest of the world, which is fascinating. So kind of Yemen is like a little mini coffee world. But then, right, it's interesting. But then, in addition, there was a group of DNA fingerprints that fell out of the map, right? That we couldn't fit into these 3 mother populations that we know of. And so initially we were just like, it must be a mistake. There's something that we've done wrong, right? I mean, this doesn't make sense. And so we checked. First of all, we rechecked the DNA fingerprints, and then we collected more and more DNA fingerprints. And to our shock and extremely hopeful and positive surprise, we found an entire new group, an entire new mother population that existed outside of the known genetic diversity of Coffee Arabica. And I mean, this is massive. This is not just, as you said, it's not a variety. It's a whole new ocean. If you consider like Coffee Arabica has oceans, if you like, these 3 mother populations, we found a whole new ocean. And this ocean can be used, to expand the genetic diversity of Coffee Arabica across the world. And it represents really, infinite myriad of opportunities.
Yeah. I guess our imaginations can only really think about what it could do. So I guess like we have that knowledge, we have that understanding. How does it directly impact the farmers? How does it, how can we get more of those plants into more farmers' hands? What's kind of y'all's 5-year plan? What does it look like to see Yemenia be cultivated more and grow? And obviously you have a lot of social and political issues of just continuing to deal with Yemen and the struggles there. But yeah, what's kind of the game plan? How do you guys see it kind of unfolding over the next couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess there are 2 aspects to how this can benefit farmers, right? There are the two kind of areas. The first is through improving their coffee growing, the agronomy, right? Genetics really represents tools, if you like, a set of tools for breeders, coffee growers, coffee farmers to use to be able to improve their coffee production. So let's just say we found that Yemenia showed some levels of higher average productivity than other coffee trees, right? On an agronomic level, those plants could be used to improve the productivity of the farmers of Yemen. So that's kind of one side, and that's an area that we're really delving into to try and understand. Well, we've understood the genetic diversity. Now, what are the attributes and traits and properties of those different genetic groups within Yemen, right, on an agronomic level? And then on the other side, kind of for the market, how can Yemeni farmers benefit from this discovery through the market? And that was the next question that we wanted to answer. And the market really means cup quality, right? That's a fundamental thing. So we looked at the cup quality of this new group, and really knowing nothing and expecting nothing. So we put together. We had the private collection auction, and we put together the largest jury possible. The largest jury in the COE history. And we put them together, and we gave them all these coffees, and we didn't tell them what was what. We didn't tell them anything about genetics, and they found that the highest scoring group within the 1,500 coffees that we submitted, the highest scoring group was Yemenia. The top 10 coffees were all Yemenia. All the 90 scorings were Yemenia. So that's another very exciting avenue for tangible and direct value addition to the farmers, right? It's not only new genetic diversity that can be used to improve coffee production and agronomy, but also on the market side, it's a very, very unique coffee that can come with some significant value addition that, if done ethically, can be passed back to the farmers.
Yeah, so I want to clarify that. So you just said you submitted all these coffees, and these people that were cupping, and these are coffee professionals all over the world, they didn't know anything about Yemenia or this new mother population when they cupped them.
No idea.
That's pretty mind-blowing. And I think that having that control is really important, because as we know in coffee, and if you've ever been to a cupping and you're watching this, like, if they didn't talk about it, they should have perceived biases, and just one word, even a face, making a face can totally throw off your perception of a coffee. So the power of perception is a real thing. So that's fascinating to me. And that's really what intrigued us. We were a part of that initial webinar where you guys released the information. And I'm sitting there going, man, is this real? Like, I don't even know, So it's pretty cool to think about what this could do. So, okay, and those of you joining us, we're again having a few minutes with the owner and founder of Qima Coffee, Faris Sheibani. Faris, so I'm gonna push back a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the BS that came out, okay? And the reason why I think this is important to bring up is really twofold. One, we don't want to hide from things. We want to have transparent conversations. But two, I think it's really important for consumers. The more they can understand the complexities of the coffee industry. I mean, we could talk all day about C market, the coffee prices crashing, the realities of climate change, production levels, all that stuff. But it goes beyond that. Now we got other issues where you got people that want to get higher prices. You got people that have ulterior motivation, and that shouldn't be a surprise for anyone. Really, every industry we have people that are greedy or want money or whatever. But I guess let me give a quick backdrop for those of you who may not be aware. Essentially, when Qima came out with their private auction that we were a part of and won a lot on, it was only within, I believe, a day or two. William Boot came out with a video basically asking questions but instigating in a way that seemed very antagonistic. So I'd love to hear from you, and you had a great response, Faris. So feel free, those of you who want to dig a little deeper into this, I think it's a fascinating thing. Feel free to go on YouTube and watch Faris's response. But talk to us a little bit, really what you want to share about it. But where I think it's important is understanding the transparency level of what's really going on here, and how is this impacting even the work you're trying to do, really, because it's also impacting that in several ways. What are some of the allegations, and what are some of the responses? And you don't have to, I'm sure you could talk forever on it, but like, I don't know, what are your thoughts on why is this inhibiting the ability for you to really see this move forward in a positive light for the people of Yemen?
Yeah, I hope it's not inhibiting it, but it certainly presented an unavoidable challenge. It was an avoidable challenge. So I think the first thing to say is that it's critical that people are able to, anyone is able to raise a concern, especially in the interest of traceability and transparency, to ensure that everyone plays by the rules, right? And no one's no one's doing anything underhanded. So that's a given. And the other thing to say with that, that's kind of a precursor for that, is that it needs to be done responsibly. And I think that was my gripe with that video. And I know Willem personally, we had a working relationship a while ago. There was no phone call, there was no email, there was no attempt to just ask the questions, just anybody, I mean, however people would want to. I mean, call, text, WhatsApp, whatever you want. It was done in a strange way, and I don't know why, but it was done in a strange way. And as you said, many have said that it felt antagonistic, right? Kind of the style of it. What were the allegations? I think questions. Number one was that there are some local names that are used by farmers, right? And are you trying to replace those names, right? And putting your own name and forcing that. So I think that was really driven by a lack of knowledge of Yemen's coffee industry, right? And if you've only ever visited Yemen once and spent one day in Sana'a and never set foot in a farm, you can be forgiven for thinking that and saying that. So I think that farmers do use local names in Yemen. They use many local names. These names typically refer to the phenotype, the look of the tree, right? And there are many. There are 20, 30, even more. And the farmers will say this is a Jufaini tree or an Udaini tree. And it's kind of synonymous with saying like, it's a long, it's a tall, round tree. It really describes the physical characteristics of that tree, right? It's long and it's maybe the branches are, a certain way. And that's what farmers use in Yemen. And even that, there is no consistency. So some farmers in the north will use it to describe tall trees that have a certain shape. And some farmers in the south will use it to describe shorter trees. Even that, there is no consistency.
Right.
So I think there are local names that are used in Yemen. These names do represent physical characteristics of the tree, but they have no relationship to the genetics. And that's what we did, right? We took lots of trees that look certain ways and we fingerprinted them. And there was no relationship between the physical characteristics and the genetic identity of the tree. The second one, that was the first allegation. And like I said, it was driven by a lack of understanding. The second one was around, well, we've heard that Qima has trademarked Yemenia. That feels suspicious, sounds suspicious. Trademark means that you're trying to ban people from doing something. So what exactly are you trying to ban people from doing, and why are you doing that? So it's a complicated topic, and I'm trying to tackle a complicated topic in a very open and transparent way, and considering the 2-3 minutes that we have to tackle it. But I think trademarking represents protecting a word. It does not represent anything about the genetic resource itself. So there's nothing in trademarking that talks about controlling the genetics or the trees.
Right.
Why do we do that? So first of all, we discovered this new group, right? Just practically. So then we're like, what the hell do we call this group? Well, I mean, do we just call it the group? I mean, how do you communicate this, right? I mean, how do you tell people we found this thing? You say this thing. Right. You need a name, right? That's just how humans operate. So we said, well, let's pick a name that represents all Yemenis, right?
Yeah.
Let's not pick Qima group, right? Or Faris's group, right?
The Faris mother species.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's pick something that represents all of Yemen. Okay. So Yemenia, it's broad. It has Yemen in its name. It refers to the females, the women of Yemen, who are really the overlooked part of the coffee community in Yemen, often overlooked. It's the mother population. So it's a name that has wide appeal and that does not bias anyone. Then we were like, well, practically speaking, if we release this name now, then two things are going to happen. Someone's going to like this name and they're going to trademark it. And then they're going to say, hey, you're not allowed to use this name. And they can do that, right? It's a name. We've given a name. And then suddenly you've done this work. You've found this new thing. And then some Joe Blogs sitting somewhere has just protected it and stopped anyone from using it. Oh.
Right.
The second thing, that's just a very practical aspect. The second thing that might
Basic
happen,
trademark law. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, basic trademark law. The second thing that might happen is that, and we know Yemen's environment, and I know the adulteration that exists with Yemeni coffee. Today, right now, as you and I speak, there's around 1,000 tons of grade 5 Ethiopian coffee sitting in Sana'a. And that's mixed with Yemeni coffee and exported as Yemeni coffee, you know? So that's a problem. That's a problem, right? And buyers are none the while, it's very hard. It's very hard to tell. So we were like, the second thing that might happen is we might say Yemenia, 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 and people jump on this cool Yemenia wave. And then we know the traders, some of the traders in Yemen, they'll just pick any coffee, forget even not being the Yemenia mother population. They'll just put Ethiopian coffee in there and say, hey, Yemenia.
Right.
So having said all of that, we did not and do not intend to use Yemeni as a stick. I'm not a policeman, right? We just wanted to make sure that nobody is going to protect it and then use it against us and against the farmers of Yemen, really destroy the value that we've created for the farmers and for Yemeni coffee. And the second thing is, we didn't want anyone to flagrantly abuse this name, right? Abuse this finding or abuse this discovery and start to ruin it, because that's what would happen if someone started selling dodgy Ethiopian coffee as Yemenia in big volumes. Then within 6 months or a year, the reputation of Yemenia would really be damaged. And who's going to suffer? Really, I mean, really, who's going to suffer ultimately? The growers, right? So yeah, so this was this was done really with that in mind. It was done with input from the officials in Yemen, right? From people in the Ministry of Agriculture. It was done with real input, a lot of them from the farmers, who are honestly my principal concern. They are my principal concern. You know, they are the guys who are at the top of this pyramid, and they are the ones who we should really consult most. And it was done with them in mind, and it was done really as a temporary. It's really until there are other means or methods of developing varieties, right? Because that's really what should happen next. You know, what should happen next now? Yemen should develop a breeding program in which breeders, farmers, growers, anyone can develop varieties and be excited about developing varieties. And then there are very established and well-known protocols for protecting varieties and, you know, acknowledging the rights of varieties to breeders or to growers or to farmers. But, you know, so yeah, I mean, it was done with the best of intentions in mind, and with the consultation of the most important stakeholders. And it was done so that this value that we've created, because that's ultimately our job, to add value in the value chain, is not either taken advantage of, right, or manipulated by dodgy players. And ultimately, if we did anything untoward, if we ended up now messing about now, you know, or pulling some strange and unethical moves now, the market would react and people would stop buying from us, right? I mean, you know, ultimately time, you know, like ultimately also time will tell. And if we're unethical, then we'll be proven unethical, and that's it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Faris, that's a great response, and obviously a complex issue with a very short amount of time. I suppose one thing I want to throw in there, if anyone watches this or is watching this that is from our industry, knew about this or follows it, I want to exhort you. I think it's crucial for us as professionals in this industry to treat this as an opportunity for one that is going to impact the farmers and potentially even the greater industry as far as growing is concerned. But two, at the end of the day, it is cup quality. We bought this coffee partially because, Yemenia, this is pretty cool, new genetic, but it was mind blowing. I've never, and I knew Yemeni coffee was different and unique, and particularly in the body. And we're talking high altitudes, folks. This is some of the highest altitude of coffee grown in the world. But the cup quality speaks for itself. So I encourage us to take a step back from the drama that it's easy to just dig into and feed into and post on social media and all this BS, and just recognize for a second, like, let's put a full stop. We got a company that so far has a reputation that's upheld itself. We have farmers that cultivated coffee. Let's drink the damn coffee. Let's enjoy roasting it. Let's drink it. So definitely go buy some. But yeah, no, I think that's good, Faris. And you bring up so many interesting realities of the industry that people, you know, I get people come in and ask all the time, have you had that cat poop coffee? And you see marketing ploys, you see marketing schemes. And even I've been in milling stations at origin where they have a burlap bag with that origin's name, but it's not that origin in that bag. And I know the importers and the exporters dealing with that. So you're right. It's complex. We're not going to, I think demonizing people is definitely the wrong way about it. So, but I appreciate you taking a few minutes to kind of share some of that, because I think we want to see this opportunity grow into something way bigger than even what it is now. And that's not going to come from just constant nitpicky drama. But like I said, I think transparency is important, and you seem to be very willing to have that. So, oh man, for those of you who are joining, again, this is Faris Sheibani of Qima Coffee, founder and owner, who helped discover the Yemenia, which is a lot of coffee that, as of today, we are now running a giveaway / sweepstakes. This is an argument between my wife and I what we should call it, to win some Yemenia for free, because this is going to be an expensive bag of coffee. So I highly recommend you go sign up, folks, if you're watching this, because we're going to run this for about, well, it ends on the 30th. So you got a little bit of time, and you get more votes and more entries the more you share. So refer your friends, get them to sign up. You get more entries, and you're going to want to win a bag of this. Faris, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. If you had a couple minutes just to kind of share to the world, to our followers, to our consumers, what would you want to tell them about Yemen coffee, Yemenia? The floor is yours to kind of give us an ending statement.
Wow, that's a tough act.
Pressure.
Exactly. I mean, where do I start? Yeah, Yemen and Yemenis have and are going through a very, very difficult time. They've been going through a difficult time. They are going through a very difficult time. Arguably one of the worst times in the recent history, at least. It's tough, really. There's a war. There's widespread poverty, malnutrition across the board. Children being acutely affected. No real end in sight, really. No real end in sight to the conflict. And if you're active in the Yemen community, all you hear is bad news, really. And this is a very dull way to start the closing statement. It's very dire. There's no other way to put it. It's a really dire situation, and this is not. It's not an understatement to say that really coffee is acting as a fundamental vehicle of not just livelihood generation, but hope. That's really what it represents in Yemen, like hope. It's like the one thing, everything in Yemen is going wrong. I struggle to think of something that's going right? Everything in Yemen is going wrong. And coffee, by some way of miracle and through the hard work of many people and through the hundreds and hundreds of years of hard work of farmers and growers, it's actually thriving. It's this bit of positive news that comes out of Yemen, and it's really this ray of positivity and hope and optimism that changes people's Yemenis views and moods and feelings about their current state. And really, we work with now 3,000 or so farmers across the country, and it's not an understatement to say that when they see their coffee doing well, or when they're rewarded fairly for their coffee and they get higher prices year on year, and maybe they see their coffee being sold at Mad Priest or some international roastery somewhere, it's really, you cannot appreciate and understand what that means to them in the environment and the climate of Yemen, in the current environment. So I think, I think that's why I'm in it. That's why I'm in it, really. That's why I'm in it. I couldn't care less about the commercial side of it. We have to have a functioning business, but that's why I'm in it. And I think that's that's why I would like the world to view it as, and not out of pity. As you said, it's this beautiful, exquisite, exceptional, fine, unique coffee. So it's like you can experience something beautiful that delivers beauty from a country of significant pain and suffering, and you can know that you're doing something good whilst doing it. And that's my message, I guess.
No, I think that's a great message, and that's again, I'm being frank here. We did not go into that auction expecting to buy a lot. So as a small company, this is a very large risk for us. But there was something inside of me that was like, I've bought Yemeni coffee before, and obviously it wasn't even close to the cup quality that we purchase now. But there was something inside of me that was like, from the beginning, we started this company with displacement and refugees as a core focus of our company. And that's still very much a big part of who we are. The second ever equity owner of this company was my first employee and just got awarded equity a couple weeks ago as a refugee from Sudan. So for us to be a part of this, it is about the cup and selling that, but I'm hoping to that message that you just spoke, that people will buy this, one, because they know it's going to be freaking delicious, but two, because they really are participating. We vote with our dollars and we buy things that impact this huge trickle down effect of people all across the world a lot of times. And so I'm glad that's what you said, because I'm hoping we can get people on that train and understanding that, yes, this is expensive. Yes, we pay a lot of money, but you know what? One, the coffee is worth it. And two, it's impacting people directly that, like you said, are in such a dire situation that everything else around them seems to be going so poorly. So, Faris, I appreciate that. For those of you who watch this, you can check out and learn more at qimacoffee.com. Definitely check out their website. Just follow them. And like I said, we are currently giving away Yemenia. The official launch will be December 1st, pre-order. We are definitely going to get out there for the holidays, so keep your eye out for that. But I highly suggest you go to our website and madpriestcoffee.com and sign up in the sweepstakes, get as many entrants. And think about it like this. Share with your friends, not just to get more entries for yourself, but share with your friends because you want them to participate in this with us. You want people to participate in something that literally could change the face of coffee genetics, and is. You can let more people know about how they can impact a country that right now there's not a lot of ways we can't help them as Westerners. So spread it to your friends. Faris, I really appreciate the time. We'll be sharing a ton of this stuff here in the coming days, and yeah, we'll answer questions as they come in. And if you want to stay on the line, I'm going to hook up with you in a second, stop this live. But folks, thanks for tuning in, and Mad Priest out. Thanks, Faris.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.